Well, thank you so much for being here. I know everybody's busy and there's things going on, but our country is in a tough situation and she needs us to stand for the truth. And we had too many decades of being too busy doing other things, and then we were awakened about 10 years ago, a whole wave of people, when Obama got elected and said, what is going on in our country? And I feel like just in the last 9 months, a whole nother wave is waking up, because we were kind of starting to move on to other things, but in January or so, my phone started ringing off the hook again. People going, are you still speaking on socialism and what's going on in our country? And all of our meetings, we've been all over the country since March, traveling for months. Most of the meetings, I'd say 80 to 90% of the people have never even heard of these films. And they don't have a clue what's going on. They're just concerned. So it's the amazing thing, agenda grinding America down is more powerful today than when we made it, because we have gone the direction that it talked about even further, and people realize this is a serious thing. But before I get into my talk for tonight, I'm going to have my family come up real quick and sing for you. We try to do everything as a family, because I think that's part of the problem with America, is the families have been so splintered and fragmented from each other that parents aren't having the influence on their children that they once had, and so the generations are separating out from each other. But we have 9 children. 2 of them are out in the bus. They weren't feeling well. And our 2 oldest daughters, who were with us last time we came here, with Stephanie Price and others, I see some familiar faces. It's kind of a fun story. They got married September 1st of 2017 in a double wedding to 2 brothers who are good friends of our family. And then the next summer, they both had their first babies 12 hours apart. They were literally in the hospital rooms next to each other, and my wife loved running back and forth to check on them. So anyway, we're very thankful for that. But they're going to sing a couple quick songs for you, and then I'll start talking.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. To the prairies, to the prairies, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
This next song, we are a Christian family, and our founding fathers were Christian men that understood a very simple principle. When you do things God's way, He blesses you for doing that. A lot of people talk about American exceptionalism, and I understand what they mean, but Americans aren't exceptional. We're blessed. We're the only country in the history of the world that turned to the God of the Bible and said, we want you to be our God. And so we look very exceptional to the world because He has blessed us. But any country, if they chose to have God be their God, they would look real exceptional in a real short amount of time if they were following his principles. And what has happened to our country is we've turned from those principles, and that's why everything is starting to unravel before our eyes. And this next song is one of our favorites.
Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me there. My burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Now I've given to Jesus everything. Now I gladly go and rest my King. Now my raptured soul can only sing of Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me there. My burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Oh, the love that drew salvation's plan. Oh, the grace that brought it down to man. Oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me there. My burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. One other special treat tonight is I have a lot of family that lives in the Houston area. Some cousins and their children. They're here tonight, and my mother and father are here tonight. And this is the first time they've ever been to one of my meetings because they haven't been in the area they live. So anyway, I'm thankful that they're here. And I'm going to tell you a few stories at the end when you need some encouragement, which you will, of how our duty is to be faithful in the little things and let God worry about the big things and the miracles of transforming our society, our culture and things. But I've got some very encouraging stories at the end to motivate you to do what you can do and don't worry about the things you cannot do. Those you pray about, because God can do the impossible even when we can't. And so as I get started here, just to know where everyone's coming from, how many of you have seen the first film, Agenda, Grinding America Down, the whole film? Okay, so a lot of you haven't. How many of you? Good girl, Stephanie. How many of you have seen the second film, Agenda 2, Masters of Deceit? Okay, just a few of you. A real quick overview, because what I'm going in tonight on the deep state is kind of heavy, but it's true. It's what has happened to our country and why Washington, D.C. always seems to be against us. And we send our people there and go, how can they give a great conservative speech, but when they get there, they don't seem to hardly ever do anything? Well, I'm going to explain to you why they don't hardly ever do anything. It's very rare. because there is a deep state there that is so powerful, but it's been in the making for 150 years, and I'm going to show you the history of that. The first film, a real quick overview so you understand. I was a state representative in Idaho, and I started to be concerned about, even in a state like Idaho, how we couldn't get Republican legislation through there for anything, even though we had an 85% majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate and the governor. And I was like, what is going on? And I started to dig in and study, and I found many things. But one of the things I found that really shook me up and motivated me to make a movie was a list of 45 current communist goals that were from 1958. Cleon Skousen, who'd been an FBI agent, had gathered all the records from all the other agents that were in undercover in communist cells throughout the country back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and he compiled a list. He said, here's the 45 main things our enemy is talking about trying to do to us from within. Well, I read this list for the first time in 2008, 50 years later, and it so sobered me and just shocked me. When, how often does your enemy, you have your enemy's list of what they want to do, and then you allow them to do it all. And I couldn't believe it. But I'm going to just read a couple of these for you so you kind of have a brief overview of the first movie, which is so important. It's the last 100 years of how we've gotten to where we are. And this is what you'll find out, like I found out as I researched. The changes that have taken place in America have been purposeful. It's not an accident America is collapsing from within. Our culture, our families, our churches, that's not an accident. There was wicked, evil people and groups 100 years ago that made lists like this and said, we've got to grind America down. And here's a couple of these to show how in tune they were with what really has made America great, like our morality. Goal number 24, 1950s America. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. You want an obscene culture. Why? Because it will collapse on itself. Listen to goal number 25. Break down the cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. We live in a pornographic society today. Any of the women's magazines at Walmart that are right eye level for my boys, any of those in 1958 would have been XXX pornography, and you would have literally gone to prison if you tried to distribute that. That's how much we have changed. And now, who cares? If it feels good, do it. But that's what's happened. This one even shocked me from the 50s. Goal 26. Present homosexuality as normal, natural, healthy. 1958, they realized if you can break down the morality, that is America's secret weapon. They're a moral society. That's why just their families are so strong and their communities are so strong. And if we can start creating an immoral, obscene culture, then the men looking at pornography, they'll eventually cheat on their wives and their marriages will be falling apart. And the young people, as they look at pornography, will become immoral. And one of the groups my film talks about, that's one of the groups that's had more influence on destroying our country than almost any, and I'd never heard of it before, is called the Frankfurt School. And one of the leaders of the Frankfurt School in 1932 wrote an essay. This is to show you just how evil and corrupt and premeditated these people are. And in his essay, he said, I am tired of trying to talk people out of the existence of God. I have a better plan. And then he goes on in the paper to talk about this. He said, we are going to push the young people in America to become immoral. Because we know if they become immoral, the idea of God will disappear all by itself. Because when you're being immoral, you don't want there to be a God. You're like, well, I don't want there to be. And so that's how we were going to erase God from America. We're going to push, and they went into alcoholism, homosexuality, immorality, everything we can, so people just don't really like the idea of God to begin with because they know they're guilty. And that's how, I mean, that's in 1932. These people just to rot us from within. Of course, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Turn it into a do-gooder club. And discredit the Bible. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage easy divorce. On and on it goes. But that's what the first film goes into. The second film is Agenda 2, Masters of Deceit. It goes into the issues we are facing today. And the subtitle to it I took from something that one of the radicals from the 1960s told us about what they were doing. And this is what he said, one of the leaders of the SDS, which was a radical Marxist group. He said this: the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. And what they meant by that, women's rights or civil rights, it's never that. The issue isn't the issue. The issue is the revolution. How can we take any issue there is and use it for the revolution to take America down? And that was a key thing they let us know. But then they pushed something like the environmental movement. And in the second film, I interviewed Dr. Patrick Moore, who is the co-founder of Greenpeace. And I said, Dr. Moore, why did you have to leave the group you started? And he said, because the Marxists took it over and all they cared about was destroying capitalism worldwide and especially in America. And then he went on to say, and the very things they're doing are actually hurting the environment in the name of saving the planet. And he goes, I'm not into that. I really do care about the environment. And so he has a group up there that's trying to help teach Canada how to manage their forests and keep them healthy and strong by getting out the old trees and planting new and things like that, constructive things that are a blessing to everyone. But what are our children taught in the schools about the environmental movement? You know something is being used as a tool against us and as propaganda when the facts that are being spoken about that movement are not just a lie, but they're the exact opposite of the truth. The whole premise of environmentalism is CO2 is a pollutant, which is laughable if you actually were educated in life. CO2 is plant food. And do you know, right now the levels of CO2 in the world are 1/4 of the optimum level for everything that is green? And yet they call their movement the Green Movement, which is to stop the production of CO2, which is going to hurt everything that is green. That's why greenhouse growers have these CO2 machines just pumping CO2 into their greenhouses. If you can double, triple, and quadruple it, plant growth life explodes. And the Green Movement says, no, CO2 is a pollutant. And so you realize, oh, anytime it's the exact opposite, that's what's called brainwashing. Someone has been brainwashed when you're taught the exact opposite of what the truth is. And a person that's been taught the exact opposite is very hard to pull out of there. Because facts did not lead them to their position. Emotions and passion, that's what brought them there. And so, and you talk to any young person that's out saving the planet, start grilling them with, what are you saving it from? How much have temperatures gone up? And how much CO2 is in the atmosphere? And how much should it be? And they don't know anything about anything. But they're saving the planet. And so, anyway, and the second movie goes into that, what's going on with Islam, what's going inside the evangelical church to capture it and use it against us. And so, they're both very important films. In 90 minutes, you get a complete education on the 20th century. So you don't have to waste your time reading hundreds and hundreds of books. So not only do you get up to speed, but then you can invite someone over and have popcorn, and in 90 minutes they'll go, oh my goodness, I get it now. It's a very important tool to save you. Just the people I interviewed in the films, I added up the number of years they have studied the enemies from within this country, and it's over 1,000 years of research. I found that experts that have been doing this for 50 years, studying the infiltration from within and what's happening. Lenin himself, who was a master strategist, Vladimir Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union. Do you know what he said? The best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. That's what a Marxist does. They infiltrate the group, subvert it, and rise up from within. And so they are leading the opposition to themselves. And so they're in total control there. If you control both sides of an issue, you're in control. And that's what they've done. Now, as was said at the very beginning here, as I'm going into this deep state talk, it's a little sobering, okay? But I will encourage you at the end with what you can be doing to make a difference. So don't feel hopeless. That's not the point. The point is to sober you, so maybe you will spend less time doing things that don't really matter that much and give a little more time to standing for the truth in your neighborhood, in your family, in your churches, in your communities, and in your state. Because we're in need of that. The Bible says a house divided against itself cannot stand. And that's where we are today. Okay, half of the country wants to go that way, and half wants to go that way. So there's no more even a chance of there being compromise. We will be going one way or the other way. 50 years ago, it was half wanted to go here and half wanted to go there. So if you went in the middle, you're kind of generally going in the right direction. That day is over. We will be going one way or the other. Now, the deep state, what is the deep state? I think if you had mentioned that 5 or 10 years ago, people would have gone, you're a nut. But the day Trump got elected, everyone, whether you liked him or not, started to go, what's going on in Washington, D.C., where the President of the United States cannot even have a private meeting with his intelligence community without it being on the cover of the New York Times the next day. There's something in Washington, D.C. that is far more powerful than the President of the United States. What is it? And I started to read and study, and I'm going to tell you some of the things I found to help it make sense what has happened. The deep state is this. It's all the things you don't see that influence our elected officials to act in the best interest of an elite few instead of in a way that is best for our country. Okay? And I'm going to talk about some of those things. It's not little magical things. It's when you hear it, you go, oh my goodness, that makes sense. That is what it is. It all starts back in the mid to late 1800s. The modern deep state that has worked to control America and most of the countries of the world. It started with a man named Cecil Rhodes. Anybody ever heard of Cecil Rhodes? Just a couple of you. Anybody ever heard of Rhodes Scholarships? Same guy. When he was in his early 20s, he graduated from college in England. He heard that they were discovering diamonds down in Africa. And he went down there and just to start working in the mines, and through an amazing turn of events, by his late 20s, early 30s, he was one of the main shareholders in all the diamond mines of Africa. In fact, has anybody ever heard of the country of Rhodesia? Mm-hmm. That was after Cecil Rhodes, Rhodesia, for him. That's how much influence he had in Africa. Down there pillaging the resources of that continent. Well, he realized something, even at a young age. He knew he was going to die young, and he did. He died in his 40s. He just had a premonition of that. He was a drunkard. He never got married. He was a homosexual man. And he talks about that in his books. Loved molesting children. He said that himself in his own books. And he understood something, though, that very few people in America even get today even. He understood this. If I want my ideas, my beliefs, my vision in life to continue on after I am gone, I have to have imparted it to people that are younger than me before I leave. And that's what the Rhodes Scholarships are all about. He took a portion of that wealth, he put it into the Rhodes Foundation, and it's a genius idea. He goes, I want the smartest and the brightest of the world carrying forth my vision. Okay, so not just anyone gets a Rhodes Scholarship. You have to have the highest test scores and the most potential where they go, hey, this person's probably going to be somebody. And so the Rhodes Foundation will come and go, we would like to give you a full college scholarship wherever you want to go. And they're like, thank you. Do you want anything in return? No. We just want to help you because you're so bright. And so they do that. They'll pay their $400,000 Harvard bill or whatever. And then when they get out, they'll have all the previous Rhodes Scholars help them get connected in business or government or media, whatever they're into, and help them work their way up. If they get up enough, a governor, United States senator, president of a college, head of a media, then and only then they come to them and say, come here. Remember we paid for your college? Yeah, oh, yeah. And we've helped you be successful in life? Oh, yeah. Well, we would like to give you another blessing. We're going to invite you into our little group. And this isn't any group. This is the inner circle of the inner circle of the inner circle. We decide what happens in the world. And of course, they're flattered. Who's not flattered to become in this inner circle where you're going to know every detail about everything going on, and you're in debt to these people. But your human pride goes, yeah, I'd like to be in the inner circle of the inner circle. Bill Clinton, of course, was a Rhodes Scholar, and many of our Supreme Court justices and senators and congressmen and many very successful people. But here's what happens when he pulls you in. Then they tell you about the vision. And here's what it is. On June 2nd, 1877, he said it was the very day he became a member of the Masonic Order. Whatever that ritual is, he did that. He said, I came home, and when I came home, all of a sudden a vision just came before my eyes, and he wrote it down in a book called Confession of Faith. He was not a Christian. And here's what he said. He said, quote, the idea gleaming and dancing before one's eyes like a will-o'-the-wisp at last frames itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society but with one objective? The furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole world under British rule, and for the recovery of the United States, and for making the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire. And he goes on and on through that Confessions of Faith book and says, we are going to work for the religious, political, and economic unification of the world. One of the people he had met down in Africa in the diamond mines was a man named Lord Rothschild, who was the richest man in the world and also owned those mines. He had the same objective to rule the world as most of these elites do. So they teamed up. And this man, Cecil Rhodes, must have been an incredible, like a Ronald Reagan communicator. Because they say Rothschilds, who knew the elites of the world, he would set up luncheons where there might be 5 or more of the richest families in the world at one luncheon, and Cecil Rhodes would come and present his vision for the world to them. And they said at the end of most of those luncheons, every single one of those families would say, our entire family fortune's in. We want to be part of this. Because they want to rule the world. And so they slowly got the wealth of the world behind this vision of the unification of the world. And the first little group that he started also had a very humble name, the Society of the Elect. And they thought that just like all these elites do, like Karl Marx they literally think, you guys are idiots. You would have no clue what is best for you. We have to tell you and every other people group of the world what to do. We are the only ones that have a high enough intellect to be able to do that. And it's just a crazy thing, but it's true. And as I studied that Society of the Elect, I saw that so many of the super rich of the world would come to those meetings, and then they would go back to whatever country they were from and start a sister group to this Society of the Elect with the same objective, world government. And it has touched almost every group that you've ever heard of. And I only have time to talk about a few of them tonight. But the key is just understanding what's going on. You don't have to know every detail. You just have to know enough to realize, wow, there's some things going on here, and it's a big problem. Now, he went on in that confession of faith to talk about other ways they were going to do it. He said, quote, through the establishment of many schools and universities, which they always want the young people, and the buying up of newspapers. What were the newspapers in 1877? The media, the entire media. There was no radio, TV, whatever. So the buying up of media, and he said, by creating intellectual arguments for our cause, we're going to dispatch emissaries of propaganda throughout the world. So we're going to try to convince everyone in the world a one world government is what's best. There'll be no more war. There'll be peace and joy and love forever. Who's not for that? And so that's what they have done for now 150 years as they've gone out throughout the world to do that. Now, another sobering piece of news for some. So their end game, of course, is world government. And it's what your own, Texas's own, George Bush Sr. always talked about. It's a new world order. He was one of the godfathers in this entire movement. Here's what, it's hard, what people that are not deceptive have a hard time believing those that are can be so deceptive. Okay? They literally know that, hey, it's got to be a two-party system, so you guys be Democrats, we'll be Republicans, and so whoever gets in there, we all win. And that's that establishment mentality. It's the elites. And that's why, if you look back over the last 100 years, you realize it didn't really matter who's in there. We're generally going in the same direction. The only exception, Ronald Reagan, and then even Donald Trump. Now, why do you think they are butchering him? Because he's not part of this little group. And so they're like, no. They swore after Ronald Reagan, we will never let someone that's not part of the establishment win again, ever. They'd underestimated Ronald Reagan and his ability to communicate to us. And they said, we'll never have that happen again. Well, it happened again. A guy was making too much sense. There was an unlikely president, but he was just making too much sense, even to people that were Democrat, going, I think this guy might be right. I think I'm going to give him a try. We have lost all our union jobs, and we have lost all manufacturing, and so that's what happened. But that's what it is. And again, world government is the agenda. And as I've read so many books over the last 150 years that were written, everyone that's for world government, they all knew one thing. If we ever want to get a world government, America has got to go. You can't have one country up here like this and everybody else wallowing in the mire of socialism and poverty. It's just not going to work. Because even these people don't want it. They go, no, we want to get to America. And then Americans, of course, are not going to accept it because they're going to go, thank you, no. We like the way things are. We don't want to go waller in the mire with all of you. And so that's why everything, as you study this over the last 150 years, it's why our State Department has almost always been working against the best interests of the United States. Even though they're talking the big anti-communist speeches, they're funding the communists behind the scenes, they're stopping us from having victories over them in areas, and you just see this stuff and you think, these people are idiots. But as you study and you look at the agenda, you realize, no, we're idiots for thinking they're naive in what they're doing. They know exactly what they are doing. They are purposefully undermining America. What did Trump find out when he first got in there? He's like, as a businessman, he goes, every single trade deal we have is totally against us. It's not even fair. Every business deal in the history of the world is fair, because you don't sign it unless both people are happy with it. Well, he found out, no, all of our presidents are happy to sign these ones that are ripping us off and undermining our economy and our businesses and our way of life. All of them are happy to do that. Well, you go back to 1910. One of the men that went to the Society of the Elect meetings was a man named Andrew Carnegie, who was one of the wealthiest men in the world. And he came back and he started a group called the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Doesn't it sound wonderful? Who's not for international peace? Every person on the planet is for international peace. They always pick names to deceive us into what they're really about. Well, unfortunately for him, In 1964, 54 years later, the Reese Commission in Congress was studying tax-exempt foundations. And one of the researchers just happened to study the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and was going through some of the minutes of one of their meetings from 1911. So right when they started, and they found this. It said, quote, "Is there any means known to man more effective than war to alter the life of an entire people?" And they go on through the paper to say, we feel the only thing that is capable about bringing world government and international peace is if we can create as many wars as possible with as much loss of life as possible. And then finally people will be so tired of sending their sons to die, they'll submit to our world government. And there's memos, usually after about 50 years, the congressional top secret stuff, the FBI, the CIA, the KGB, they declassify a lot of the information. So you can go back and read things and see exactly what was going on. There's memos from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace to the White House and to Congress during the World War I saying, do not stop this war yet, that we have not lost enough boys. We need to lose way more boys. Because they were hoping the League of Nations was going to be able to start world government right after World War I. What was World War I? The war to end all wars. Because they were hoping that world government's going to come right after that. And it didn't. And then when you know this, and you know what the elites were doing behind the scenes, you start to study all the history you do know and go, I want to make sure what I was taught is true. Well, you study World War II with an open eye. And you really look at the the stuff we know for sure now. And you realize we were poking and prodding and begging Hitler to attack England. He did not want, he did not want to attack England, and I'm not defending him, he was a nut. But he didn't want to, that was the chosen race. He did not want to attack England. In his Mein Kampf, his own book, he said, I want to take over Russia. That was his only goal, is taking over Russia. But see, our State Department heard that and goes, that's the motherland. All the elites in America in the 1930s and 40s thought communism was the future of the world. They thought it would create a utopia on earth. That's why they were also infatuated with Stalin and everybody else. And so that's what was going on. But you see, oh my goodness, we were just, Japan, all the things we were doing to just stir up war. And isn't it interesting that when Japan attacked us, who did then we attack? Not Japan, Hitler, because he was going into Russia. And and I'll get more into details about that, how powerful the Marxist movement was in our government in the 30s and 40s. And that's why all the advisors to FDR were saying, you've got to stop them. They're taking over the motherland. And so, what was the goal of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace? War. As much war as possible. And they hoped at the end of World War II, after the slaughter, that we'd be ready for the United Nations to implement world government. And everybody wasn't quite ready yet. But you go from the 10s there, you go then on to 1913. And the Rothschilds family, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and many other of these super rich elites, by 1913, they were able to buy up enough of our congressmen to, in a very deceptive, deceitful way, pass the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Well, a lot of people, even today, good patriotic Americans, don't understand the Federal Reserve is not a federal bank. It's not the Bank of America. It's a private bank, okay? And we do not even know who owns it. It was put in the charter. We can't even know who the stockholders are. But the act of Congress gave them total authority over our money. How much to print, what interest rates would be, and every other detail. Okay? Here's what's interesting. If you look at the original charter, it says one of their main objectives was we need to get inflation under control. Okay? Well, again, all of us in this room were born after 1913, so we think inflation's normal. That's always gone on. Everything goes up a little bit each year. No, sorry. From 1770 to 1913. Okay, that's 143 years. Guess how much inflation there was in America? Over 143 years. Minus 6%. Things actually went down 6%. Do you know how rich everyone in America would be if our money was really growing in value through all the wonderful things we can invest in a free society? Everyone would be millionaires. When your money's really growing, it's not being depleted by inflation every year that goes by. And how much inflation have we had since 1913? 10,000% exactly. Everything has gone up 100 times. You could buy a very nice home in 1913, a beautiful Victorian, gorgeous home for $4,500. And today, a nice home is at least $450,000, and maybe more than that, depending on where you live. I was born in 1965. A brand new Corvette was $3,200. A brand new Corvette today is about $70,000 or more. The Corvettes have not gotten more expensive. Our dollar has lost more and more value, where it takes more of our dollars to buy the same thing. And John Maynard Keynes, how many of you have ever heard of Keynesian economics? Every president in the last 100 years has been a Keynesian economist. Well, John Maynard Keynes said back then, we are going to steal all the wealth from America through inflation, and not one man in a million will be smart enough to see what we're doing. It was purposeful to impoverish us, so we're in poverty, so world government, whatever. When you're in poverty, you're not really worried about who's in government. You're worried about, what am I eating today? And like in the Soviet Union, they cripple you down where you're in just survival mode. So you don't care about who's in office, who's doing anything. That's all, and that's what they wanted. Then you go to 1933. This is hard to believe for me. I wasn't around back then, but in 1933, FDR, with the Federal Reserve, said, we need to confiscate all the gold in America.
Yep.
Back then, your $20 bill was a $20 gold piece that was a 1 ounce gold coin. That's how much value our money had. That's why there's been no inflation for 143 years, because gold doesn't go up or down. It stays relative. It might have little fluctuations, but the value of gold is the same today as it was 2,000 years ago. It'll buy 300 loaves of bread. That's what it's always bought in the history of the world. An ounce of gold, 300 loaves of bread. And it'll still do the same thing today. So prices don't go up. But he took all the gold. He promised you're going to get it back. And what did we get for the gold? Paper dollars from the Federal Reserve. They go, oh yeah, we'll take your 1 ounce gold coins. You can have a little piece of paper here. And we never got the gold back. And do you know it was against the law to own gold all the way to 1973? For 40 years in America, it was against the law to own gold. And if you did, it was 5 years in prison. It wasn't like a little fine or something. And many of the patriots of the 1930s, they did not give in their gold because they realized a president shouldn't be taking our wealth from us. And then when it was found in their homes, they went to prison for it. I mean, that's the Gestapo that started under FDR. Here's what's amazing. It fits into this puzzle. As the countries of the world in the 1930s saw what FDR was doing, I'm sure they all thought the Federal Reserve was part of the American government. They realized, man, the world is unstable. Maybe we should give our gold to the Federal Reserve too. So about half the countries of the world shipped all their gold to the Federal Reserve and were given these beautiful brass certificates that said, here's, $2 billion worth of gold or whatever they had deposited. You can get it back anytime that you want. But in the early 1970s, good old Richard Nixon, he in a press conference came out, nonchalantly said, we just wanted the countries of the world to know that your gold certificates will be no longer redeemable in gold. Thank you, you can have paper American dollars. And so they kept the gold of the world. But as you dig in deeper, it makes more sense then when you know these things. One of the countries that gave the Federal Reserve their gold was Chiang Kai-shek, who was the freedom fighter, pro-American, fighting to free China. And we had been supplying him with munitions, supplying him with food, everything we could to help them. Because he was going against Mao, who was a communist, and we're like, we're not for them. Well, shortly after, the gold, I think he had 20 tons of gold. When it came to the Federal Reserve, all of a sudden our State Department really felt all of a sudden, you know, I don't think we should supply him anymore. Maybe Mao is going to create a better utopia than he, and we cut off all munitions, all supplies, eventually ran out of bullets, and Mao was able to wipe over the country. And we know today that he killed a minimum of 70 million of his own people. 70 million. And what's amazing, to show you the mindset of the left that has no value of the individual, when Obama was appointing his czars in 2009, just 10 years ago, two of his czars, when they were asked, who do you admire most in the world? They said Mao Zedong. A man that slaughtered 10 times what Hitler did, and they don't even think that's a radical statement. Because then they're thinking, hey, if 70 million people aren't going along to get along, get rid of them. We're into creating utopia. We care about the collective. We don't care about the individual. The good of the many outweighs the good of the few, which is Marxism. And so that they don't even understand us going, 70 million human beings that are made in the image of God and priceless in value? Are you kidding me? But then you realize, well, people will do anything for 20 tons of gold. Then you go, one of the families that went over to the Society of the Elect meetings was the Rockefeller family. And they came back to America in 1921, and they started a group called the Council on Foreign Relations with their stated goal to work toward implementing world government. Now, I cannot even exaggerate to you the influence of this group, because every single president since 1921 has had most of their top advisors and cabinet positions be people that are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Even Ronald Reagan, almost every single one of his cabinet members was a CFR member. And you would say, why? Because they have successfully sold themselves to Washington, D.C. as we are the brains of Washington, D.C. Well, who doesn't want the brains of Washington, D.C. working for you? And so if you don't know, when did you start and who started you and what was their plan? If you don't know those things, but that's why all their recommendations, all their big think tank papers that go to the White House and go to Congress of recommendations from all our 250 PhDs, this is what you should do in state of, are always anti-American, always against what's best for our country. Well, it wasn't an accident. One of the things that has always intrigued me, I've been studying communism for decades now, and we found out in the 1990s when the Venona papers files were released, and the KGB files, and all these top secret documents, we realize now for sure that most of the main advisors to FDR were indeed Soviet spies working for Stalin. They weren't just liberals, they were members of the Communist Party, getting their orders, and that we intercepted KGB wires coming to them in Washington, D.C. of what this is what we're doing next. But I thought, how did they all get in there? And as I studied, I realized what it was is when FDR, when they passed the New Deal, it over doubled the size of government overnight. So, and that's where we see, communists went into Department of Agriculture, Education, anything they could get into. They didn't care. They just wanted to be there so they could have their ear to the ground. What's going on? What can we do to push things against America? And that's what happened. And the Marxists were already so powerful then in the media, academia, government, and everything, that anyone that would come out and say, I think we got some communists in government, their charges were never looked into. Everyone would just say, how dare you call someone a communist? You're evil. One such man was a man named Whittaker Chambers, and he wrote a book called Witness, which is one of the greatest books of the 20th century. And he was a communist spy working to infiltrate and take us down from within, and something happened to him. He became a Christian. And all of a sudden he realized, if there's a God, communism is wrong because they say they are God. And so he runs from the party. He knows they're going to come kill him and his children and his wife. And he's hiding out in Florida, but then he also has another reality check. You know what? My best friends are in this government to destroy it. I can't just run and hide. I have to let them know what's going on. And so he came forward, and one of the man that was his literally best friend, because they'd been working together for years, was Alger Hiss, who was the main advisor to FDR's whole presidency. He's also the man, might be interesting, that FDR put in charge of writing the charter for and being the first head of the United Nations. We wonder why that's always against us. It was set up by a communist, for communists, against us. Harry Dexter White, he was head of the Treasury Department, and we know today he was a Soviet spy under Stalin. He was put in charge by FDR to start the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and also the World Bank. And we wonder why all these things are just against us. They knew what they were doing. I'm sure at Yalta, when Stalin's sitting there with Churchill and FDR, he's going, these people are idiots. He knows all his agents that are advising these idiots next to him, and I'm sure he's just like, how pathetic. He knows his man is going to set up the United Nations, which they're going to take control of. And so over and over again, through the 30s, 40s, people came forward. The most famous of all was Senator Joseph McCarthy, that was just butchered. And we know today from all the declassified documents, he was exactly right on what he said. He was a great patriot that was kicked out of the United States Senate because he dared to say, we have enemies within our government. And that was never investigated, so they all stayed right where they were. They just butchered, sacrificed him, and it taught everybody a lesson. Don't you come against the communists or you're finished. And so everyone, I better be quiet. And that was all they... M. Stanton Evans, who's one of the men in the first movie, and he just died of cancer a couple years ago. He wrote a book before he died where he took 7 years of researching just original source documents to prove, and it's called Blacklisted by History, that Joseph McCarthy was right. And it's an unbelievable book. And I asked him when I was interviewing him, I go, Mr. Evans, we've been told over and over again of all the lives that were destroyed because of Senator Joseph McCarthy. Are you telling me he did not destroy anyone's life? And he said, Curtis, the only person that was destroyed by McCarthyism was Senator Joseph McCarthy. They did to him what they were accusing him of doing to everyone else. Well, in the 60s, we had a couple KGB agents defect to our country. Now, can't you listen to a KGB agent? They might know something. One man was called Anatoly Golitsyn. I think it was 1968 he defected. He said, listen, our FBI interviewed him, our CIA, and their conclusion was, he didn't really know what he's talking about. He had 139 predictions for what was going to be happening in the Soviet Union. He says they're getting ready to go through a great perestroika glasnost. They're going to make you feel they're gone forever. Because they're desperate for technology, they're desperate for funds, because communism doesn't work. And he let us know all these things. Up to today, 125 of his predictions have come true. And the CIA, when they're still confronted with this, goes, see, he didn't know what he was talking about. He was off on a couple of those things. He got so frustrated because no one would listen that in 1984 he wrote a book to the American people. It's called New Lies for Old. And in that book he said, Gorbachev has been prepared for this moment in time. They are going to have a great deception come to you. And he said this, it's 1984, he wrote the book. He goes, I'm telling you, American people, they are so serious about deceiving you, I think they're even going to take down the Berlin Wall. 5 years later when it happened, we're all like, wow, Ronald Reagan won the Cold War. Isn't that great? And we didn't, a man had warned us for 20 years before that. No, no, no. I'm telling you. They realize they can't make it. What's happened since the Soviet Union has dissolved in 1991? We have given them hundreds of billions of dollars. We've given them all the latest technology. We've opened up our patent offices to them, everything. If you'll be nice, communists, here, just take it, take it, take it. What did we see a year ago when they tested their new ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile? It went over 8,000 miles an hour. We have nothing even close to that. And we go, wow. Someone told us they needed help. They were getting behind in technology. They were getting behind, and they needed to pretend this thing is over because they needed help. Well, we gave it to them. And no one still listened. I think you probably heard this I think Fox News is the only one that's even ever mentioned this. This is in the last 12 months, and it even shocks me from studying this. And my dad's the one that videoed the little clips off Fox. It was just a little segment, and that was the end of it. But do you realize over the last 12 months, John Brennan and James Comey both admitted they had been communist? I mean, the last head of the CIA and the head of the FBI today, not 50 years ago, they said, oh, we're not anymore. Well, I'll tell you, I've been studying the communist mind for 20 years. Once a communist, always a communist, unless, like Whittaker Chambers, you have a life-changing experience. And then you know that has happened because then they're the most pro-American, pro-freedom, anti-communist in the history of the world. Because they've been there and done that, and they know how evil it is. Well, neither one of them have had that transformation. So, over the last 100 years, everyone that warned us, we never listened. So all those people stayed in their positions of power and were able to work against the best interest of the United States. Again, if it was a tree in front of me, a big tree, the deep state, the roots are those super rich elites all over the world that are funding. They're the roots that are funding this mechanism of nonprofits, media, colleges and universities, think tanks, everything to influence and change America from within. And there's so many things I could go into. I talked about the Council on Foreign Relations. There's another group called the Institute for Policy Studies. They always have leftist recommendations, but our Congress listens to it and takes their papers. Well, I looked into who is the IPS. You don't have to look far. They were started in the 1960s. We know now from declassified files, the funding to start them came up through Cuba with the KGB. And then you study the people. Who are the people that started this group? And you research each one of them, and you see all of them were what is called red diaper babies. And what that means, it's people that were raised by parents that were both members of the Communist Party. They don't join the party because they don't want that stigma on them, but they're raised in communist homes that are trying to subvert, and those are the people who started the IPS. They had a new paper that came out in January, and I was reading through it on their website. They don't hide anything from you. This is what we recommend to do. And about a week later, I saw a newscast where Nancy Pelosi was laying out the new platform for the Democrats now that she's the new speaker again. And it was almost word for word what their policy was. I mean, I just read that. I mean, guaranteed employment, a significantly higher minimum wage, affordable housing, Medicare for all, higher taxes for the ultra-wealthy, a congressional committee on reparations, on and on. It was everything. She just took it and said, thank you, and that's what we'll do. And it goes on and on. Now, here's a key thing I want to explain to you, because we need to understand what's happening so we can each try to pull some young people out. Again, the other side, like Cecil Rhodes, and the Karl Marxes and the John Deweys, they knew something. If you have the children, you have everything. And if you don't have the children, you have nothing. That's why they've always been after our children. They don't care about us, you're going to die off. If we have your children, we have everything. Every two-bit dictator in history has gone after the children. And here's what they've done. They've been dumbing down our schools for 70 years. Even goal number 17 from the 50s. You wonder why all our kids love socialism? Listen to goal number 17 from 1958 America. 17, get control of the schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism. Soften the curriculum. To start teaching socialist ideas so that seems just, it seems fair, it seems right to the young people, and then they'll jump at it. Well, the millennial generation that's been coming through the last 10 years and is continuing to come through, here they were specially prepared for what is happening today. We're going to be marching into socialism over the next 10 or 15 years. But here's how they've done it with our young people. The millennial generation was the generation that got the trophy for showing up. Remember? Yeah. We all kind of laughed, oh, isn't that silly? It wasn't silly. It was incredible strategic manipulation. Okay? When a child from 5 years old on is taught that the world works where if you show up you get a trophy, when that's not how the world works. You got to sweat and sacrifice and commitment, and then maybe you'll get a trophy. And they were taught, no, everyone gets a trophy. It doesn't matter if you worked at it or not. Everyone gets a star on their paper. It doesn't matter if you did a good job on it or not. Everyone is smart and wonderful and the best. And that's why we're giving you a trophy, because you're just the best. Well, they believe the lie, and it's a total lie about how the world works. So then, K through 12, they were not taught anything that would help them be successful in life. Amen. Just isms and movements and immorality. Go do whatever you want to do. And all this confusion. So they get out of high school and they say, what should I do? And our society says, if you want a good job, you need to go to college. So, okay, so they go to college. 4 more years. And unless they were in a hard science, they got nothing except propaganda, causes, movements, beer parties, immorality, where their lives are unraveling, falling apart, and just get passed through the system. But so they've been coming out for 10 years now. I used to be in the restaurant business for 20 years and had almost all college students working for me and love spending time with them and debating issues and stuff. But here's what's happening. They're coming out and they know they're the smartest kid ever because they've been told that since they were pre-K. And they can prove it. They got all these trophies on their shelf. I'm a winner. I'm the best, smartest kid ever. And this was strategic against them to use them. Okay? And so they're coming out, they're looking for that $100,000 a year job starting, because they deserve that. No, I know, if you're the smartest kid ever, don't you deserve that? Of course you do. They can't find it. The few that can get fired within a month because they cannot show up on time, they cannot follow directions, they cannot be committed to someone else's cause of the man whoever runs the business. You can't go, no, I need to make him successful. That's my job while I'm working here. No, I got to text somebody. I don't have time for that. So they get fired even if they get the job. But here's the thing. But they're coming, and this is why it was so strategic. So they're coming out, and they realize something. I'm not the problem. The problem is the system. This free enterprise capitalist system is unjust. I've done everything you ask, and I can't even get a good job. We need a system change. And that's what they're calling for now. 85% of those that are 35 and under. And it will continue to go because they were the generation that finally came along where you were able to keep dumbing them down, where they were literally, and by making them immoral, by not having anything be disciplined, by not ever having consequences for actions, they were the generation that came forth, that they were been molding since the 30s, that literally they can't make it in a free enterprise system. They don't have the character, the virtue, the morality, the work ethic. They don't have the tools to make it in a free enterprise system. They have to get a government job or something where they can get tenured within 3 years, then no, they can never fire me now. That's what, and again, there's exceptions to that. Some of my cousins here are exceptions to that because they were homeschooled. But I'm telling you, that's the mass amount of young people, the vast majority, that's what they're doing. Do you know what? The high school seniors in America, when they are asked to rate themselves of where they stand in the world, math, science, history, everything, do you know where they rate themselves? Number one in every single, not even number two in a category. Every single category. And yet they're 25th to 40th in most of the categories. That's how successful the brainwashing has been. So we need to get these young people, wake them up. And we need to help instill discipline, virtue, and morality, things that are necessary to be successful in a free country. And Samuel Adams said that, didn't he, as President, John Adams. He said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So that's why they're always against our morality, and of course when they're talking about religion, then they're talking about Christianity. That's why everything is against them, because they know if you can destroy morality and Christianity, these people will destroy themselves with the freedoms they've been given. Like you cannot, if you don't self-govern or fear God, you will self-destruct in a country where you can do whatever you want, and that's what's happening.
Yep.
Now, as I've studied this for years, I kept hoping, maybe I'm blowing this out of proportion, or maybe it's not like this. But some of these people, they're so prideful, they wanted to tell us before they died what they'd been doing. And one such man was David Rockefeller. His family, he just died a few years ago at 101 years old. His family did more to destroy America than anyone I've ever found yet. And in his memoirs, he finally wanted to toot his horn and let you know, yeah, you guys have accused of all this stuff over the years, and you were right. Here's what he said. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global, political, and economic structure. A one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of working against the best interest of the United States over 100 years with billions of dollars of resources to grind America down. Because they want to be sitting on top of the world. They're not happy just to be billionaires in America. They want to be trillionaires and rule the world. One of the groups they also started was called the Trilateral Commission. And that's the group that puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. I was always confused. How do they let everybody know what's next? Are they calling each other, sustainability is what's next? Of course not. So what are they doing? And this group, I found this group and I realized, okay, this group is the who's who of everything. I mean, most Fortune 500 companies have a representative at these meetings. World media is there, college presidents, vice presidents, politicians, just in every area of our culture, they're there at these meetings. And it's where they do get the, hey, this is the next thing we need to push to make the world better. We need to push sustainability. So the companies are there, so they hear that, and they go, okay, we'll start putting green leaves on our packaging. The media's there, we'll start beating the drum on how serious this climate change is. The college presidents are there, and they say, we're going to start a sustainability degree at our college. Oh, great, great. And the politicians are there, we'll start pushing sustainable legislation. Okay, great. And so that's how they get on the same page, and these are just the elites of the elites. But when Harvard University starts doing something, what do all the other little schools do? Oh, if Harvard's doing that, we better do that too. And when the big media outlets are doing something, the little ones go, well, we better do that too. That's the new in thing. So it just trickles down to everything very quickly. Well, someone was able to slip into one of those meetings and record David Rockefeller talking to them. And this is what he said. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we'd been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and the world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. What's national autodetermination? It's you voting for who represents you. He says that is a thing of the past. The world needs to be run by what? The supranational sovereignty of us. The elites in this trilateral commission with the world bankers funding what we're doing. And so that's how the orders get shifted out and transferred. And that's why Washington, D.C. is almost always working against us. Almost always throwing so many things at us. All we can even try to do is play defense. We're never offensively pushing anything. We're just trying to stop all these bad things coming. That's very strategic. If you overwhelm the enemy, they just can't ever come against you. They're just worried about trying to hang on to every little piece of things they can hang on to. And that's what's happened. And that's why we need to be praying for our president. We need to be praying for members of Congress and our leaders. And we need to be encouraging them to stand with courage for the truth. They're not there for the name tag. And if they are, get them out of there and get someone in. Get someone in there that would rather not be there. I'm always concerned when someone goes, yeah, I'd like to be a congressman. I go, no, we don't want you. We want the person that goes, I really wouldn't want to do that. But I tell them, it's your duty to do that. That's the person you want. So that's the main thing I saw as being even a state representative. I realized everybody in here is people that have been drawn here because of the name tag. So that was their goal, to get the name tag. Well, if that's your goal, then you'll do anything to keep the name tag. So as things change over time, you'll have to change with them because you want to keep the name tag. And that's what I realized. That's why it doesn't go well most of the time. Now, a couple quick stories to encourage you. These are really good ones. My mom and dad are here, and you're going to get to hear a story about them just being faithful in the little things, and then God deciding, I'm going to bless that. In 1961, they lived in St. Louis, Missouri. My dad was full-time in graduate school, with a PhD in electrical engineering, and he was working full-time for McDonnell Douglas, so he was very busy. And my mom was pregnant with my sister, and the doctor had kind of said, you need to stay in bed the last 7 months because you're going to lose this baby. She'd already lost 4 children. They go, you're going to lose this one too if you get out of bed. So she stayed in bed, but she used her time wisely. One of the books she read was a book called Masters of Deceit. I named my second movie after it to honor someone that tried to warn us, by J. Edgar Hoover. He was the founder and head of the FBI. He knows more about what's going on in our country than anyone. He's got thousands of agents undercover in groups listening. What are they doing? What are they doing? And he himself wrote a book in 1958, and he said this: if you Americans don't wake up, these masters of deceit are going to take you over from within. And he had a whole chapter on the church. He goes, we see them going into the seminaries, going into the divinity schools. We see them going to the Christian colleges. And they have a whole section on the media and Hollywood and education. He said, wake up. They're taking this country over. Well, nobody hardly listened. Except my mom did. She read that book and it shook her up. And she told my dad, Jim, you got to read this book. He's like, I'm too busy in school to read this book. And she goes, you need to read this book. And he said, okay. And he read the book. He couldn't believe it either. And so they got strategic. And I encourage you, always look for ways to grow your influence wherever God has placed you. If you got 2 friends now, work toward having 4. If you got 4, work toward having 8. So you can influence for the truth. Well, my mom would be home all day. She would read the letters to the editor in the St. Louis newspaper. And anytime someone was written by someone that got it, they understood what was going on. She realized, we need to connect with them. So she'd call them up and say, we need you to start a small group in your home. And my husband, invite all your family and friends over, and my husband's going to come over and give a 2-hour lecture on communism. And so, isn't that exciting? I mean, but listen, just think, the year before, The 1957 Chevy had just come out. Everyone's enjoying the sweet life. That's why no one listened to J. Edgar Hoover's book. What are you talking about, enemies? This is heaven on earth, America. And so they were too busy. Well, my dad tells me this story. He said one night he came home and it was pouring rain. He was exhausted from class and then work. And right when he came in, Mom said, I got a meeting set up for you tonight. And he's like, I'm too tired for that. And she said, you need to go. You don't know who might be there. So he went. And probably because of the rain, he drove across St. Louis in the rain. When he got to the meeting, only one man showed up. But he was faithful in the little things. He gave the one man his 2-hour lecture on communism. When he was done, the man came up to my dad and said, if half of what you said is true, we are in serious trouble. And my dad said, well, that's why I'm doing this, even though I'm so busy. They became good friends. He started borrowing all his books and things that my dad had read. And in a few months, he knew more than my dad did about this issue. And he came to him and said, Jim, I'm going to quit my job and write a book on this. And my dad's like, well, don't get carried away. And he said, no, I've got enough money to last 2 years. So he quit his job and he researched and wrote and studied. And he finished his book 2 years later in January of 1964. But he couldn't get anybody to publish it because he'd never written a book before. So he self-published it. Now, remember 64 America. There's no internet. There's no credit cards. If you want a copy of his book, you literally have to send him cash or check in the mail. Okay? There's a little form in the back you tear out and send it to him. It's not in a bookstore in America. In 8 months, in 1964, out of his garage, he sold 6 million copies. And when Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States, he said, I would never have been elected President of the United States if John Stormer in 1964 had not written the book, None Dare Call It Treason. The book from the man named Reagan. God used it to start the conservative movement in America that then 16 years later was able to elect Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan himself used to buy those. I talked to John Stormer in boxes of 100 back in 1964 and give them out to his friends. He was just a Hollywood actor then, but he said I'd see his name and he'd buy boxes of 100. He goes, I wish I'd have saved the checks. But they're worth more than that. But listen to me. You might not be the person to write the book, but you might be the person to influence the person that writes the book. We have to be faithful in the little things, okay?